Tsarnaev не признал своей вины. В США в первый день слушаний по делу о терактах во время бостонского марафона подсудимый отверг обвинения по всем 30 пунктам. По большинству из них Tsarnaevу грозит смертная казнь.
A video aired by a Russian TV news channel shows the accused Boston bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev inside the courtroom on Wednesday, or for what's worth, whoever is replacing him in case he's actually dead. Apparently the video was recorded inside an American compound or something like that, but as long as it was recorded in front of a TV, the images have poor quality, and he appears just a few seconds. It's hard to say for sure whether the guy on the bench is a decoy or actually him, but still this footage raises the question on why the Russian TV have a video from inside the federal courtroom and the US TV news is showing only sketches of the hearing. What exactly the American mainstream media doesn't want people seeing.
Tsarnaev 7 раз ответил отрицательно, спокойно и с заметным акцентом.
Having a body double seems plausible for a subject who has lived in America for 10 years, has got an uncle with deep ties within the CIA, and has been groomed by the FBI to be a patsy in the biggest false flag event sanctioned by the US government since the 9/11. But the problem with the decoy theory is that his sisters at the courtroom hearing should have spotted the double, unless it's a clone. But I'm not even going there, in order to avoid more controversy. But the fact is that the reaction, or lack of reaction of his sisters, would be a dead giveaway on whether someone else replaced Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. But considering how people of his family might be so afraid of ending up like the older Tsarnaev brother, that even if they realize he's dead, and a decoy took his place, odds are that nobody will say a word about it. But then there's another problem. After a former wrestling teammate have told the Boston Globe that the guy in the courtroom didn't look like Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, didn't act like him, and had a different body language, and his strong Russian accent have been highlighted by the reporter, the CNN is also implying that it was someone else and not Dzhokhar Tsarnaev in that court hearing. When conspiracy theorists say something like that, is one thing, but when two big outlets of mainstream media start implying the same, then it's another entirely different situation.
Her sob, and that's when he looked in her direction. And throughout this very short hearing, didn't last more than 10 minutes, he continued repeatedly looking back and smiling at the two women. He did have some signs of injuries. The left side of his face seems to have suffered some nerve damage. He was wearing a cast. His fingers were bent, but he really looked almost uninterested in what was going on around him. He kept moving and fidgeting. The judge was speaking to him. He wasn't making any eye contact. He kept sort of touching his face and his neck. And so it was rather interesting that he really was he was ignoring the proceedings that were going on around him. He did enter a plea of not guilty repeatedly to the 30 charges against him. And what was interesting is he had a very thick Russian accent. And after the hearing, I spoke to a couple of his wrestling buddies from high school who'd shown up. They wanted to see this guy who they'd known so well and thought was such a good guy. And they were really, really surprised because when they knew him, he had no sign of a Russian accent whatsoever. The reason they came is because they wanted to see whether there was any of the old Dzhokhar left. And the person they saw in that court, they said it wasn't him. Again, he's pleaded no guilty to 30 charges against him, Wolf. 17 of those counts, carry the death penalty.
And Wolf? You say he looked physically okay, strong, if you will, after the recovery from those injuries?
Yeah, absolutely, he did. He was much taller than I expected. He was probably about 6 feet, maybe a little taller. But again, it was his body language. It was his demeanor in that court. He was really not focused on the judge. He turned around, sort of looked back at some of the people who were back sitting in the courtroom. But it was really the two women who are relatives, possibly sisters. It's those two that he had the most interaction with. One of them actually had a small child, and that child was sort of fussing throughout the court proceedings. So certainly.
Now we know that there's an actual footage recorded inside the courtroom, so it's probably a matter of time until someone upload a better version on the internet and we see if the decoy theory still holds water.